The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I kind of wish I didn't have to speak on this bill today, report stage of Bill C-31, because it's a bill that we in the NDP very much oppose and very concerned about its passage through report stage and then on to third reading. And I just want to begin my remarks by reflecting on the history of this bill and first of all, our colleague who has worked so hard on this bill, Newton North Delta, who has worked so hard in committee, and I know that she tried valiantly at the committee to make amendments to the bill to improve it. And this bill does have a very interesting history in that it was originally, well, it was an original bill and then it got amended to C-11 as a result of the Conservative government being in a minority parliament. And it was interesting that at that time there was some cooperation and collaboration to actually take some of the worst aspects of this bill out and to move forward with a bill that I think was more acceptable to all members of Parliament. Of course, what happened was that we now have a majority Conservative government, and it's really very disturbing to see that what they did was, rather than continuing with the compromise bill, the former C-11, that they came back with a bill that's really quite horrifying in terms of what it will do. And I think what I find disturbing is that when you hear the speeches from the government members, on the one hand they tell you that this bill is all about fairness and balance and that we're going to be treating refugees in a proper way and respecting international conventions and Canada's history around refugees. But then on the other hand, everything that comes out of their mouths is basically about abuse. It's about abuse of the system. And it's the same kind of mantra that we see of so much of the government legislation around law and order and the criminal code and criminal justice. It's always about focusing on what they see as abuse and changing laws in a massive, widespread way that has an impact on society as a whole. And it's a very disturbing feature and pattern that we've seen in this government, and I think it's a tactic that they use to actually divide people. And I think there are fears about people coming to Canada. People have many fears about things, but when you see a government deliberately playing on those fears and exploiting people's concerns about whether it's immigration or refugees or whatever it might be, it feels really bad. It feels like this is absolutely what we should not be doing, and that our laws should be based on overall merit and objectivity and based on the public interest rather than singling out abuse. We've seen that many times in the political environment, whether it's attacks on people who are poor, who live on welfare, what we call poor bashing, where laws were designed to basically scapegoat people on welfare when the rate of abuse is no more than people who are in the financial sector who are involved in abuse. And so it becomes very much a class issue, I would say, Mr. Speaker, something that we don't use very often as a term in this House, but it becomes a way of singling people out, of targeting particular segments of our community and saying there's good people and there's bad people, there's the criminals and there's the victims, and making that very simplistic division. And I wanted to begin that way because we just see it so much in so much of the legislation that's coming forward. And unfortunately, this bill is no different. It's a bill, like, again, many other bills from the Conservative government, that confers greater power and authority on the minister. I'm the health critic for the NDP. We've seen recent changes in the health field around the Food and Drug Acts that will do the same thing for the Minister of Health, confer much greater power in terms of decision-making, away from expert advice, away from kind of a broader notion of public interest, and it becomes much more of a partisan and I would say even ideological decision-making process. And again, this bill, C-31, that deals with our refugee system, is no different, and in fact is probably worse. So there are many reasons to oppose the bill. One, because it does concentrate more power in the minister's hand to, for example, name what he designates as safe countries without any advice from independent experts. Secondly, another major concern is it restricts access to the humanitarian and compassionate consideration grounds for a refugee. Now, this is very problematic. What it actually means is that a person must claim at the beginning of a process whether or not they're going to file for refugee status or humanitarian and compassionate grounds consideration. Now, this is a huge issue because people may not know at that particular point which avenue they need to go. And in fact, as it is now, people can go through the process and they can also file for humanitarian and compassionate grounds and know that that is a due process that they can rely on. So that change as well is very, very problematic. And of course, the big one is the arbitrary designation of so-called irregular arrivals and all that means. And this raises huge alarm bells. I remember reading over the years what's taken place in places like Australia, where they had mandatory detention, and the kind of xenophobia and sort of violent public discourse that took place as a result of that kind of government practice and legislation. And I think many of us feel that this is something that Canada now seems to be embarking on. This is absolutely the wrong way to go. Mr. Speaker, I feel very concerned because when we have the minister making decisions without expert advice, those decisions can become very political and very partisan. And, you know, yes, we're in politics. We all make political decisions. But when we're dealing with something as fundamental as a refugee process that is governed under international conventions and UN conventions and Geneva conventions, it's very, very critical in terms of how we approach that. And so having the minister being able to say what is a safe country or not, or saying that, for example, the European Union is not a safe country, I think misses the complexity of our global environment. I recently saw a film called Never Come Back, which is about the Roma in Canada. And the film begins by speaking about Roma people who have settled in particularly the communities of Hamilton, in Toronto. And at the beginning, you sort of think, wow, these are, you know, great contributors to local society. There were people who are working in schools, who are working in long-term care facilities as cleaners and in pizza places. They had a soccer team. And you think, wow, like, were these people persecuted? Are these people refugees? And then all of a sudden, the film takes you back to their home communities, and you saw the unbelievable persecution that the Roma had experienced in their home country that was horrifying. And it's something that's actually going as sort of neo-Nazism grows, and again xenophobia and violence against targeted minorities grows. And so it's very alarming to me that the simplistic approach of this bill and the fact that it puts so much power in the minister will possibly mean that many people who are legitimate refugees, who legitimately are fleeing persecution and who make an enormous contribution to our society when they come here, these are hard-working Canadians, that they will be cast aside for political reasons because we've been told that this bill is about getting at abuse. And so there's this heavy-handed approach at basically eliminating the possibility of many people who are legitimate from also coming through. So, Mr. Speaker, that's only a little bit of what I wanted to say. I know my time is up, but suffice it to say that another sad day that this legislation appears to go through. It's been resoundingly criticized by every major organization that deals with this issue, and even new groups like the Canadian Doctors for Refugees in Canada, who are so concerned about regulatory changes involving refugees and their health coverage that they formed a new group, and 50 of them visited elected members' offices. This is something that, you know, we've not seen before, and I think it's because this kind of legislation is now impacting so many levels of our society that people who haven't spoken out before are now saying, I've got to speak out. So, Mr. Speaker, we hope that possibly some of our amendments on report stage will be approved. I have my skepticism about this, but nevertheless, we will continue to speak out against this kind of legislation. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Vancouver East said that the bill would eliminate the possibility for some asylum claimants to get protection in Canada. Is she not aware that, in fact, every asylum claimant from every country, regardless of the mode of their arrival, would have access to the same kind of full fact-based oral hearing before an independent, highly trained IRB decision-maker on the merits of their asylum case with no negative prejudice associated with it, that, in fact, this bill will maintain Canada's absolute obligation of non-refoulement for bona fide refugees. Furthermore, she mentioned particularly Roma refugees, asylum claimants. Is she aware that over 95% of asylum claimants coming from the European Union have abandoned or withdrawn their own claims of their own accord, admitting that they do not need Canada's protection? Is she aware of that fact? Would she care to reflect on it? Thirdly, I know this member has proposed repeatedly that we grant old age security to immigrant seniors after their third year of residency in Canada. It now appears that she also believes that we should be providing free supplementary health benefits to even smuggled migrants and rejected asylum claimants in Canada, because I think I heard her endorse the position of those criticizing our changes to the interim federal health program. I'd like her to clarify, is she in favour of granting supplementary benefits to even failed asylum claimants and smuggled migrants, which benefits are not normally available to Canadian citizens?
The member for Vancouver East.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess my response is that I have a great fear that the changes in this bill that will give the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship more power will mean that the system won't work the way it used to. And I guess it is a matter of trust. And I simply do not trust that minister nor his government to actually engage in a fair process. I think they have another agenda. And that's why we feel so very concerned about this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever the minister might put forward today, at the end of the day, this bill is about the process, about the minister's powers and what will happen. What is the potential for what could happen? And so I think we can say very clearly, along with every other group that's examined this bill, I guess they don't want to hear the answer, Mr. Speaker, but anyway, I'll continue. But any group that's examined this bill has come to the same conclusion as the NDP, that this bill should be defeated.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the member in regards to Canada's international reputation. If you take a look at it, we have somewhere in the neighbourhood of 10 million plus refugees around the world. Canada was respected as one of the countries that was really playing a leading role in terms of the whole refugee policy. And yes, we do get a good percentage of refugees compared to other countries, and we see that as a positive thing. But we have had numerous people that have come to the committee while this bill was being debated, and there was a consensus that was developing that, in fact, Bill C-31 will, in fact, tarnish Canada's leadership role on the whole refugee file. And that's something that we should all be concerned about, because most Canadians are quite compassionate and feel very strongly in terms of protecting those individuals, even if that means not necessarily having to come to Canada, being able to come to Canada, but our influence in the world to be able to make a better home for people around the world.
Member for Vancouver East.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't at the committee, so I didn't hear the witnesses, but I certainly talked with my colleagues who were on the committee, and I heard a very similar description of what took place at committee, and I think there is a lot of concern about what it means in terms of Canada's, not only our reputation, but what our obligations are in terms of various conventions for refugees, and that this bill, if it goes through, one, I think there's suggestion that it will violate the Charter in terms of arbitrary detention, so it may well face a legal challenge, and there may be other challenges in terms of how it contravenes international conventions. So again, one would think that this would give the government some pause for thought to think about what our role is in the international community, but it appears that they're not willing to be thoughtful, that they do have a very political mission on this bill, and that is to create this sort of them and us situation, to focus on abuse, and in the process deny many legitimate refugees the opportunity to be in this country.
Order. Before we resume debate, I'll just let